far as the county is concerned, is collecting the money. Because you owe taxes that you didn't pay. You owe the late fees of 1.5% per month that we talked about. Oh, and I didn't mention, you owe advertising costs. $40, $60, $80, $100, $120, depends upon the county, where you are in the country. The county wants to give you notice to make sure you understand you're delinquent on your taxes. So they will mail a notice to the same address you have on file where the tax bill is sent. They may even mail you two. But they also take out an ad. In fact, you'll get a special, if you subscribe to the newspaper, you'll get a special insert about a month or so before the tax sale, 6 weeks maybe, that lists all of the delinquent tax properties by parcel number. So that everybody knows who has and has not paid their taxes. That's a way to give you notice that your bill is delinquent. So you can't come back later and say, hey, I didn't know I didn't pay my taxes. I sent the check to the bank. I thought the bank took care of it. Might be the bank's problem, but they're not going to be able to get out of it either. They're going to owe all these fees and costs and things. So you have the tax that were due, the late fees that accrued, the advertisement costs that are now due, and what happens at the auction is an investor bids a certain rate of interest to say, yes, I'll pay the taxes in exchange for a return on my money in the form of an interest payment. The statutory maximum for that is 18% per 6 months or portion thereof. So if you're delinquent on a $10,000 tax debt, the interest could be as much as $1,800 if you redeem the day after the investor pays it. Not $1,800 divided by 365 days in a year, 18% per 6 months or a portion thereof. That's the absolute screaming worst scenario. Now what happens is this is a competitive bid, and it's going in the opposite direction of what you're accustomed to. So it starts at 18%, and the bidders drive the number down. The most common range that I have seen on these is somewhere between 3 and 7%. This varies from year to year. It varies from property to property. I couldn't even tell you the rhyme or reason. It is possible that the rate would get bid all the way down to 0. In other words, some investor saying to the county, I'll pay Luxon's delinquent taxes, his interest charges, his advertising fees that he owes, and I won't even charge him for the interest. Why would somebody do that? Why would an investor bid 0 interest eventually?
In hopes of obtaining the property?
Right. In a case where the interest rate is so low or non-existent, the only logical answer is that they're hoping you don't redeem. If you remember a couple nights ago, Steve and I were talking about what happens if you have this little sliver of a property, nobody wants it, it's next to a highway, you got no access, whatever. Those are the kinds of properties that people who own them sometimes wake up and go, why am I paying taxes on this thing I can never develop, I can never build on, and I can never sell to anybody? What's the point of that? And they just stop. So some parcels nobody wants to bid on, or even if they did bid on them, they don't really want to redeem them. They'll take a flyer on the taxes, but they may not really want to own the property. It's not a slam dunk that once you buy a piece of property, you're going to be able to make a lot of money on it. There's a reason that some of these aren't, where the taxes haven't been paid. So anyway, to revisit this, the investors decide, again, they start at 18%. It's an open outcry auction sitting in a conference room or whatever, run by the county treasurers, and people register and put up money, and then the bidding stops when nobody will go any lower. And on to the next parcel, and on to the next parcel. DuPage County takes 3 days. Kane, I'm not sure, I haven't been to one for a long time. Cook County, longer than 3 weeks. Something like 19, 20, 21 business days. So 4 weeks possibly. A lot more parcels in Cook County because of all the condos and much greater density in the size of the county. So again, how long the tax sale goes on depends. Cook County, in fact, they have to have a lottery. So many people want to bid at Cook County, they can't accommodate them. They don't even try. There's a lottery. Every morning they draw who's going to get to sit that day. There was a bid rigging lawsuit a number of years ago where one company in Cook County sued a bunch of others because he said they were rigging who got to sit for the sale. Not even who bought the places, but they were just rigging who got to sit for the tax sale. And they won the suit.
So what happens in the event of a foreclosure then? Is the investor just out the money?
So, because of the priority, where the taxes come first, if the lender or investor or anybody who's in that chain of title has an interest in this property, once the property is sold, this then becomes the priority.
Even though it's it's not private, it's not the state's.
Correct,
problem?
because you bought the queen's position. When you show up with your bucket full of cash, right? What you're bidding on is not title. What you're bidding on is you're saying, I'm Kate, I want to be queen of that property. I want to be in the same position as Kane County. So if you outbid everybody else, whether it's at 0% or 2.5% or whatever the number is, as long as you pay the taxes over the next couple years, that can be yours. And remember what we said about priority. What happens to all the junior liens?
They disappear.
They disappear. So if you pay those taxes and nobody else redeems during that statutory redemption period, which can be as long as 2.5 years, you can own that property for the cost of paying the taxes for that period. And that's it. You do not have to pay off the loan. They're all gone.
Okay, that's what I was curious about.
Anybody here ever up at 4 o'clock in the morning watching really bad TV? When these guys on there, wanting to sell you their system of how you can buy a house for $400? This is it. They pick some rural spot in the country where the taxes are only $400, and somebody doesn't pay the taxes, and all you got to do is pay the taxes, and voila, you can end up converting that into an ownership situation. That's what they're describing. You now know that, and you get to sleep now at 4 o'clock in the morning because there's nothing else to really learn about the process.
So you never really lose any money then as an investor?
Well, you can, right? Because if you pay the taxes,
Right.
and you're not sure what property you paid the taxes on, you don't do your due diligence and look at these parcels and drive around and see what they are, and you bid that and you think it's really cool, and then you find out the week afterwards that what you bought is a 10-foot wide, 300-foot long strip of old railroad right away that can't be developed for anything, you may decide, well, that was the worst $200 I ever spent. In which case, you don't pay the taxes anymore, and even if you are awarded the tax deed, title does not transfer until you actually record it. Any tax deed that is not recorded within a year in Illinois, the title retains, goes where it was or ends up the property of the county. So occasionally a tax buyer will realize we made a mistake. I'll give you an example. 12 years ago, I was taking a course at DePaul, 13 years ago, and a guy who was in the course with me worked for a company that bought properties through tax sales in Cook County. They purchased, he said, a significant shopping center in Country Club Hills. Not like Fox Valley significant, but probably bigger than what I have in Aurora. And he said that the mortgage on the property was $5 million. So this is a significant place. So they purchased the tax right, and after a couple of years go by, or a year, or whatever the time is running into the time where they're going to be able to take title, they picked up the phone and called the lender because they expected the lender to redeem. And the lender just said, he said, aren't you going to redeem? And the lender said, no. Occupancy of this shopping center, 10%. 90% vacant. South Cook County is brutal. South suburban Cook County especially is a brutal place to own property. If you don't understand what you're getting into there, it's not the same as the rest of our world around here. Take a look at Lincoln Mall in Matson, which is now closed, a couple of vacant anchors, guy basically bought the property for nothing and still can't make it work because it costs more to operate than he can get an income, even if it was given to you. So what they decided was that they were going to go ahead and take title to the property through the lien process, which they did. And once they got hold of it, they realized that the property taxes they had to pay to Cook County were more money than what they could generate in gross rent. So just owning the property at almost no cost was a losing proposition. It does happen. It's rare, but it can happen. Whether it's that little sliver of a property nobody wants or an operating entity that just isn't a good thing to have your hands on, it is possible. However, a lot of very capable and intelligent people make money at this process. So if you're in a situation where you, your spouse, anybody you know has some cash and you're looking for a place to park it, and this is intriguing to you, start learning about it by going to a tax sale this fall.
I buy I pay the taxes on somebody's property this year,
Yes.
and don't do it next year, and somebody else pays on that same property, who gets taxed billing?
I think you have to maintain that tax bill.
Keep
That's
paying.
my understanding. I'm not 100% certain of that. I've never gone through that process. I've been on the other end 3 times, but I have never been on that side of it. So that's the thing. Every time I get the same question, and every time I say the same thing, every time I tell myself, I should probably look into that, and then I never do. So I now officially hate you, because you've embarrassed me. But no, that's a perfect question. I just don't know the answer to it. My assumption is you have to keep paying those. I do know that if the property is vacant or abandoned, I think you can get it faster. The 2.5-year redemption maximum is for residential property, particularly occupied. After that, I'm kind of a little fuzzy on how that whole thing works. It's an intriguing place. This is something my dad had once said he wanted to do, and then he never really got into it, as far as I know. It's an interesting place to put money. So, all right, so that's the basic idea, the basic process. So understand, at least anyway, what's happening here is the tax sale, what's being purchased is the tax lien right. That first priority position for all those junior liens, all the other lien holders, including the mortgage lenders, would drop off. You cannot bid, by the way, on your own property, nor can you engage someone to bid on your behalf at the tax sale. So if you're delinquent and you miss that November 16th date or whatever the date is on your tax bill, you have to wait until the tax sale is over. I had a lender miss my, back in the early 80s. I was out of state. Tax bill wasn't being sent to me. I was supposed to be sent to the lender. My address on file was no good because my forwarding order had expired. So the delinquent notice didn't go to the bank. The delinquent notice went to my bad address twice. And then I didn't figure out until October or November, and by then the bank had missed it, and they paid all the costs. It was their problem. It wasn't my problem. That rarely happens today. But Cook County, or remember the city of Chicago in particular, put out notices. They would have to have advertisements that tell you, if you're wondering if your tax bill has been paid, pick up the phone and dial in and check the parcel or check online. Because the counties will not be responsible, even if it's their error, they will not take responsibility for your tax bill not being properly credited in a timely manner. So one of the things you get when your lender takes on that risk is it's the lender's responsibility, and they got to make that work. If they don't escrow and you have to pay the taxes, it's wholly on you. The other 2 times it happened to me was when I was managing somebody else's business property. Once I took over the property where, unbeknownst to the property owners, the tax bill had been skipped a 1.5 years earlier. Just one payment had accidentally been missed. We literally found it amongst some other papers, and I looked at that, my heart sunk. I thought, oh my God, I got to find out what's going on. So we had to pay it, took care of all that, but we were probably within a year at the most, maybe less, of losing the property entirely, and nobody knew it for one stinking $6,000 tax payment. The other was a case where I was managing a series of properties that were not self-sustaining. And we had a deal to close on an office building in Chicago on November 15th. And that money was going to be used on the 16th, proceeds of that, to pay off a tax bill for some property in DuPage County the week before it would go to tax sale. Couldn't borrow any more money against the assets because they were already mortgaged to the hilt. But I knew what the cost would be in June to just stop paying the taxes. It was a way to conserve cash. So what happens to the office building sale on November 15th? It got extended by a month to December 15th. So now we didn't have the cash to pay the taxes before tax sale. So went to tax sale, 7% was the fee, we paid it off the 3rd week in December, and that was the end of it. So by intentionally managing it and knowing that it was a problem, but we didn't have any debt against the property, there was no lender to complain, it was a way to sort of borrow money without borrowing money, basically, at a relatively high rate. But in that case, it worked.
So just to sum up, like, if you don't pay your tax bill, correct, and someone notices that, they can go ahead and pay your tax, right?
At the tax sale, right? They have to go through the auction process, right?
At the auction process, and then right away, like, they'll be owner of that property or
No,
your property?
title doesn't change at all. You remain owner for up to 2.5 years.
And then after that?
Then after that, they'll get a tax deed, in which case, if they record it, they become the owner.
The person that paid off your taxes,
Yep.
they become the owner.
Right, and you have no more right or title to the property at all. But at any time in that 2.5 year redemption period, if you catch up and pay the taxes and the interest and everything that is owed to that investor,
Mm-hmm.
it's your property and it never transferred from you, and kind of no harm, no foul, it just costs you a bunch of money. Make sense?
Definitely a better return than the bank.
Well, you know, today, right, as the investor, sure, it's a place to put your money. At times, there's a lot of competition. If there are a lot of investors, the rates can get to be kind of low. Now, what happens to the taxpayer is after the tax sale, you redeem by just walking up to the payment window at the treasurer's office. Although the money's going to the investor, the county treasurer collects it and forwards it on. And as soon as you pay it, you're good. You know, the clock stops ticking. So if you're obligated to pay $1,000 in interest on your delinquent tax bill, anytime in that first 6 months, you could pay it on, you know, day 180 or whatever, you know, as long as it's in that 6 months. Money may not get to the investor for a couple of days, but as long as you paid the county, that's good enough. You can see who bought your tax bill, but you don't have to deal with them. It's much easier. Easier for taxpayers to just deal with the county in a faceless kind of, oops, sorry, wait, you go pay your bill, and that's the end of it. All right, so what happens if there's no bids at the annual tax sale? What happens if nobody wants it? It's that sliver, it's that dangerously under-leased shopping center or whatever. There is instead a forfeiture sale. Now what happens in all the forfeiture sales I'm aware of, if there are no bids, automatically the county will take that tax lien position and fund it themselves. So technically a forfeiture sale says, here's what happens to the property if nobody buys it. The county can sell that tax lien right anytime they want, but they'll take title at an automatic statutory interest rate of 12% for 6 months or a portion thereof. That's a good interest rate. A county who can borrow money at 6, 4, 8, whatever percent, it makes sense for them to use their bonding power to pay off taxes, because if people redeem, they're going to make a good return. So that's usually what happens. Now ultimately, if that property never had any bid at the annual sale, and the county takes, you know, the tax position and nobody ever does redeem, it could transfer by a cheat basically to the county, right? They could petition the court to say that should be ours, so they get the tax deed basically. So now you can have a scavenger sale, which doesn't have to include just properties that have come to the county by way of tax sales that, you know, never had any bids, or forfeiture sales, but also this can include properties that came through escheat or any other means that the county's got the property. And at a scavenger sale, right, then what ends up happening is that the county can sell it for whatever number they need. Here, they always have to redeem the dollars that the taxpayers are due. But once it goes to the scavenger sale, if they have to sell the property for $1, they legally can do that, even though they never will have redeemed the delinquent tax amount. Doesn't happen very often, but just recently in Cook County, there were some properties that they were selling for $1 a lot. And I remember very well in the 1970s, maybe into the early 1980s, you could go into Chicago, and in some neighborhoods, you could find properties for $1 and nobody would buy them ever. Lot after lot after lot, nobody would buy them, because there was nobody in their right mind who would buy, say, 20, 30, 40 acres of, you know, certain parts of the south side of Chicago and bulldoze them and build a subdivision, because nobody was moving into the city. Everybody was still sort of moving out or just kind of hanging out there. So it is possible that the scavenger sale, and it could be necessary for a county to sell property for well below market value or well below what the tax debt was, and they're allowed to do it at this point in time, if that's what they have to do, to just get it off their books. Because ultimately, the county doesn't really want the cash from the sale of the property. What does the county really want? Yeah, they want the money, they want the property back on the tax rolls. That's what they need. They need that money for all those other agencies that they're trying to help fund. So that's really the whole idea. Right?
What's your opinion? There's been a lot of that in the Tribune lately.
Yeah.
People with $5 lots.
Right.
What's your opinion on that? Personal opinion?
Well, Chicago or any urban market is kind of an interesting thing, because, you know, it's all about where the jobs are and where the development is. And all of the development in the city has all tended to be north. Initially, this has all been driven by racial stigma. I mean, it just is. A lot of it is race. And then, of course, that also gets tied to socioeconomic status. And then you just get overdevelopment or over purchasing, over, you know, redevelopment. Now you get the Cook County Land Bank Authority, which has some funding to be able to go in and buy up houses, and they either can fix them up and sell them, or they can just bulldoze them. And, you know, that's their choice. I think you have to look at that and decide, again, what's the demand and how stable is it? If you bought property in the right part of the city in the 1990s, you could have made a lot of money on that kind of land because the city began to come back. As you're watching the real estate recovery today, it's very spotty. It's pockets. I like to describe, a similar term is used for technology. I like to describe real estate development and gentrification in a city like Chicago as you always have to be careful to be too far out on the bleeding edge. Play on the word bleeding edge. Development can go right down a corridor and then stop and turn right or turn left. And all of a sudden, you're owning the property across the street from all this brand new, shiny, cool looking development, and you're still a slumlord because nobody went across the street for some reason. It's a little bit like, you can see it a little bit in downtown Aurora, in some of the areas near the city in Aurora, where for some reason it's just stayed the same. Again, if I probably mentioned this, again, if it wasn't for the Hispanic business community in downtown Aurora would be a ghost town. So you've had some element there, and you have some jobs, and you've got great transportation with a train station, but you can't really sell large numbers of condos. Nobody's been able to do it. So it takes a certain critical mass. So for me as an investor, I'm not going to go to Englewood and buy a lot and renovate a house. But if I had $100 million, maybe, because then you just go in there and you can create everything you need, all new shopping centers and everything. So the term gentrification that I mentioned is kind of about sort of bringing an area back to what we would consider kind of normalcy. Some people see that as sort of class warfare, because people who have no job or people who struggle or who live only on minimum wage need a place to live too. And so if you want to gentrify an area, what usually happens is the poor people get pushed out, they got to go somewhere, and they end up somewhere else. Kind of depends upon how you see the world, right? See life. So I have mixed feelings. There's opportunity. My family developed or redeveloped property in Pullman, near West on Madison Street, and at Damon, which is now a property that is right across kitty corner from United Center, but wasn't in a great area when it was done in 1985. So I have some experience there. We also redeveloped took some apartments and turned them into condos on South Dorchester in Hyde Park, and owned quite a bit of property over the years in Hyde Park, none of which we have anymore. But so I mean, I've seen some stuff in the city firsthand as a developer, as well as having been a contractor there for decades. It's just different, and you got to know that market. I wouldn't jump into it blind. Remember, it's not buy low, sell high. It's buy high and sell higher. Yeah. So low demand areas are intriguing. I wouldn't hesitate to move to some of those low demand areas with my wife, for example. Live there, but I probably wouldn't have lived there with my daughters. I'd move downtown Aurora in a heartbeat. If I was teaching at the Aurora campus, and if we wanted a smaller place, I'd look at one of the condos or place in town. I would do that in a minute. Some people say, I don't like downtown Aurora. It doesn't bother me. Of course, I'm big, I'm white, I'm male, I'm old, I'm near death anyway. So, no, but really, I don't have any. I've never, for one instant, been afraid or terrified or scared or bothered or annoyed in downtown Aurora. Never. On the other hand, I have colleagues who, are a little bit concerned about the lighting at night. You get some dark corners and dark spots. Not because of any incidents they're aware of, just because they're uncomfortable in that kind of a shadowy sort of surrounding. So, and it all comes down to where you're willing to live, what you're willing to do. I think you'll find, for example, in many of the South Cook County, including South Chicago neighborhoods, where you're talking about residential development, that probably a disproportionate number of the property owners and developers, the proactive people really trying to make a difference, are themselves black or Hispanic or the minorities, who that's where they come from, or that's an environment that they feel comfortable in, which in my mind helps to show that a big part of the problem is that the majority of white developers are sometimes just a little bit uncomfortable because of things they just don't understand, emotional stigma of one little bit, which is, I think, partially foolhardy, but you got to get into a neighborhood to know it, to understand it, to make it work. Anyway, all right, so I think that's all of that kind of thing. There's a lot of development opportunities in real estate, certainly, and anybody and everybody has an opportunity to find a niche. Ultimately, if you find a niche and can make it work, that's the place you want to be. All right, were there any other questions at all about the tax sales, about the scavenger sales, any of that kind of thing anybody didn't understand or wanted to know more about? Okay. So another type of tax are special assessments. Special assessments are either involuntary or voluntary. It's still property taxes, but now they're not general taxes anymore, they're for a specific purpose. So you can get hit with a special assessment, for example, because the water main bursts and needs to be replaced, and it's not in the city's budget, and so they go through and replace the water main, and they bill all the surrounding property owners through your tax bill. That's a way for the city to fund it, but the taxpayers who benefit, pay for it. You pay both the principal and the interest. The advantage of doing it that way is it's all income tax deductible. It's real estate taxes, so it's possible. That can also be voluntary. Your people in your subdivision could get together with the city and say, we don't want to wait 5 more years for the city budget comes out where you're going to replace our streets. We'll do it now, and we'll pay it back. And then the city does it, they fund it, and then when it's done, that get a line item on your tax bill. 5, 10, 15, 20 years, whatever the agreement was. So that's where your special assessment could be a voluntary tax because you negotiated and agreed to it. Let's see. I think that's probably pretty straightforward. Everything else I think is up there on the slide.
So,
Question? Yeah, go ahead.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Out in Hinckley where I live, they had to rebuild one of the water towers, and they had to get like a $5 or a $10 million loan. I don't remember the exact specific amount. But instead of putting it on the tax bill, what they did is they added it to the water bill.
Yeah, that's an option. It's a matter of how they want to fund it, and sometimes it's how they are going to, what gets them the best financing option. So if you're looking at revenue bonds, where you have to have a particular revenue stream to cover something, it could be that like a water bill is a better way to prove or generate that revenue.
So it's better for the village because then everybody has to pay it instead of just like the homeowners, and then it's.
Well, in that area, it might be cover the entire city might end up paying it instead of just
Right.
people in that area. But yeah, and it's going to go onto the bill. So whoever's paying the water bill, the renters, whomever, that's who's going to pay that cost.
And then you can't deduct that on your.
No, it's not. See, because it's not a. As a landlord, if you were paying the water, right, it's an expense, so it's a business expense. But for the renter, no, it's not tax deductible because it's not taxes. I have the same thing now. For some reason, Glen Ellen, which has always had an all-volunteer fire department, now charging every homeowner $7.50 on the water and sewer bill for a fire department fee. If that was in the tax bill, it would be tax deductible. But on the water bill, it's not. And I don't know why they chose that method. I'm sure it has to do something with municipal finance for whatever reason. Anybody here living in an SSA? Nobody?
Nobody used to.
Okay.
It was for the fire department.
Okay, so not for, just for that, not the whole property wasn't like covered by an SSA?
I don't think so, it was just because they had to put up a special fire station.
Okay, so they funded it that way. Okay, interesting. So an SSA could be used for a number of reasons. The most common thing around here today is that it's used to fund the development of the new subdivision that was built in the first place. So let's talk briefly about real estate development on how residential subdivisions and how that would work. The norm is, the standard, the usual, typical kind of what's typically been done over the years is a real estate developer goes out and buys some large tract of land, and then they redevelop the land by moving around a bunch of earth, taking care of drainage, putting in water mains, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, streets, sidewalks, driveway aprons, street lights, and whatever else they need to make the entire development now viable for either themselves to act as a home builder or home builders to come in and buy the individual lots and build custom or tract homes or whatever and sell them to individual buyers. That's the basic process. The cost of buying the land and developing it then is all, and the interest carrying charges, etc., is all built into the price of the lot. That makes sense? That's how they would recover it, by putting money into the lot. Starting many years ago, I think in Florida, which is unusual because usually all really cool but weird ideas start in California, but this was started in Florida. Somebody came up with the idea of, why are we going and getting private bank financing? Why don't we use the municipal or county bonding capacity, which you can do for real estate development. Government agencies oftentimes have excess bonding capacity. They're rated for more than they borrow. Right? They don't all borrow to the hilt, and most of them do not. And so you can pay them a fee, an eighth of a point, a quarter of a point, or something, and use that bonding capacity to get lower interest rate, longer term, non-recourse, meaning no personal guarantees kind of financing. And the government agencies will agree, especially if there is going to be all this new development within their jurisdiction, so they're going to get the benefit of this. So this was the basic idea. The problem is now the real estate development is being paid for by borrowings that aren't paid back in the cost of the lot. So you have a lower sale price for the developed properties, and then who's got to pay back all that debt? The home buyers, the homeowners, over a period of 10 or 15 or 20 years, whatever the time length of that SSA area is. So there's very minimal, but there is some required disclosure. If a home builder has an SSA for their development, they're required to disclose it. And I swear that conversation must go like this. By the way, I just want to let you know, we have an here in our subdivision, because it seems like nobody gets that that's what they've done. And to make sure at the beginning of development that people qualify, those bonds usually don't kick, those bond repayments usually don't kick in right away. They may be out 18 months or so. So the people who buy within that first 6 to 12 months will qualify on a lower payment, and then that SSA payment kicks in, which can be a lot to take in. And depending upon how it's done, treated as taxes or not, those payments may not be tax deductible. Because if you're repaying principal, for example, that's not really a tax deductible item, right? If you're just repaying the borrowed money. The interest might be, or if it's treated in a different way, so it's treated as a property tax, then it could be deductible. But oftentimes they're not even deductible the way you would normally see it. So as a real estate agent, it's really critical that you know which development has an SSA and which does not. Two identical developments across the street from one another, one where the developer got private financing and it's covered in the lots, the houses are all going to be worth more money. Because those homeowners aren't paying off 10 or 20 years worth of bond debt, where across the street, homes might be 10, 20, 30, 40, $50,000 less, but that's because you've got all these years worth of payments left. Also, you get into these odd situations where some homeowners will pay off that debt early and some have not. Depends upon what's allowable and what can be set up. There was a time for a little while, at least anywhere, where some lenders would loan you the money to allow you to refinance to pay that off, because that would give you then a higher appraised value, and the interest rate was lower on the home loan. But that was when values were high flying, and I don't know if lenders do that kind of thing anymore. So when you're looking at valuing a property, you need to know, okay, this is in an SSA, but has it been paid off or not paid off? So that's the basic idea of an SSA. Lakewood did this in Plano, and we've got them in Montgomery, and a number of places. I remember a buyer that I explained this to fully on a number of occasions. Still, she called me up one day and she says, "Why didn't you show me houses in this subdivision, wherever it was?" She goes, "These houses are way cheaper than everything you've been showing me." I said, "You remember the conversation about the SSA?" "No, what's that?" So I went out there, and she'd already been talked to by the home builder and still didn't get whatever they were telling her about that. Fortunately, eventually I helped her buy somewhere else because she just didn't understand this was what she was going to be getting. So anyway, I list some different benefits and different options and things here. I don't know what, if anything, you get on this at the state exam, but around here, this is an important thing for practice. You need to know because, again, it varies from subdivision to subdivision. I had in class a number of years ago a guy who sat on the village board or the zoning board or whatever it was in Hinckley. And it said at the time, this would have been about 2007, they had a half a dozen real estate developers who were all proposing new subdivisions immediately around town. Every single one proposed the use of an SSA. It's easier financing, maybe cheaper financing, not using your credit as much. All right, so the last few liens to just kind of take through or talk about here, we've still got a little bit of meat left here. Mortgage liens, we'll look at this in more detail in chapter 15. We talked about the kind of the priority. Again, lenders, priority of liens are huge. It's a big thing to them that they're always needing to look at. A deed of trust, and we'll look at this in more detail in chapter 15. It's something we don't typically use in Illinois, but it's treated exactly like a mortgage. So there's really only one class of lien up here, just a different way to name something. Mechanics liens. A mechanics lien is something that's really designed for contractors and architects and engineers, somebody who does work specifically on the property. So if Ken comes in and resides your house and you don't pay him, he has certain rights to file a mechanics lien. That's the idea of a mechanics lien. Real estate brokers are not allowed to file mechanics liens. We have no mechanics lien rights in the state of Illinois. So it's state law, which means every state can be slightly different, especially their statutory, or excuse me, their time limits or any other statutory requirements. The idea really with the mechanics lien is all about sort of when do you file and when do you attempt to, or do you attempt to foreclose. Yeah, so I got this picture up here. So let me just kind of walk you through this. So in Illinois, you must file your lien within 4 months of the time that the work has been completed. And then you have to file suit to foreclose on that lien within 2 years from the time that the work was completed, or the lien drops off and it's no longer enforceable. Now remember, as a mechanics lien holder, you can be way down on the totem pole of priorities. So then why bother to file? Well, because if you have a lien, you might still prevent somebody from selling their place without paying you, or refinancing without paying you. And ultimately, again, if you're not willing to, or if you don't have a strong enough position to foreclose on that, maybe you can get an extension. You must take, must be proactive with that. So if you're significantly into that kind of business, you're going to want to have attorneys who do that kind of thing for you, and make sure that they stay up on the time limit. Right? So that's the basic idea there. Now I think after that what I have, looking at mechanics liens issue, I have this question up here. Those of you who downloaded it, you've already seen it. Those of you who haven't, can read it, but I'm going to kind of read it to you out loud as well. So on May 15th, we have a homeowner that decides she's going to refinance. She's going to take some cash out, right, and she's going to pay off some of her bills or whatever, but she's also going to do some work. She's going to take that cash out, and she's going to pay to have the kitchen remodeled. So the contractor comes in and signs, work on May 16th. That's when the work is ordered. Contractor signs the deal, whatever. June 10th, a few weeks later, totally done. The homeowner then decides, okay, you know what? Now that I got a new kitchen, I'm going to refinance. So she goes out and gets a brand new first mortgage loan. Just refinanced before, but now she's going to go out and she gets a new first mortgage loan again on June 15th. Okay? So the banker goes out and records the lien that same day. Several months go by, 3 months, and the contractor says, hey, I haven't been paid for that whole remodel. Maybe you got paid for part of it, maybe there was a dispute, not the right cabinet color or something. Whatever it is, the contractor hasn't been paid. So he calls up his attorney and says, hey, record a mechanics lien, which happens on September 20th. So let's look at these dates. May 16th, the work is ordered and started. June 10th, the work is finished. June 15th, a new refinance with a new mortgage loan. September 15th, really we want to look at September 20th, as when the mechanics lien is filed. This should be really straightforward based on everything you read. Which lien holder is in first place and why?
June 15th.
So which lien holder is that? So that's the name of the lender is in first place as of June 15th.
Right.
Okay. And that's because of what particular reason?
Because they refinanced and that became #1 priority.
Okay. Who else has an opinion or a view? Anybody else? The answer here is the contractor has priority. Because the work was started ahead of this lien, the mortgage lien, and the work was finished ahead of this mortgage lien. The contractor didn't know they weren't going to get paid. So from June 10th until the lien was filed on September 20th, less than the 4-month required period, 3 months and 10 days later, that period of time, this would have been called a secret lien. It was so secret that until September 15th, the contractor didn't even know he was going to file it.
But I thought the mortgage company had priority over the contractor anyways.
They would if the contractor did the work after the mortgage. But because of this particular scenario, you've got a first mortgage holder who actually is in second priority to a contractor with a mechanics lien. which is when you go to a real estate closing, you'll find that one of the things you're asked to sign as a participant to the closing is, have you done anything to impair title? Either as the buyer or the seller, because the lender wants to make sure that there's not some lurking mechanics lien out there that could impair their title. Now, to make this even more complex, let's change the scenario a little bit. Instead of her refinancing on June 15th, she sells her house and it closes on June 15th. Now what happens? Now when the contractor wants to file a lien on September 20th, can he?
Yeah, because it's still got the 4 months.
Okay, and whose house is he leaning?
The buyers.
The new buyer, not the woman who had the kitchen remodeled. She's taken the gain and she's skated.
Because according to the way I understand the lien work, it actually doesn't go against the buyer, it goes against the property.
Goes against the property, that's exactly correct. So in this case here, if you take out, if you've got a sale, this is a huge issue. And one of the reasons why we get title insurance, and one of the reasons why if you are buying a recently remodeled house, what do you want to make sure? That
You got
any
waiver of
yeah,
liens.
exactly. Any contractor who's done work on the house either produces paid receipts or lien waivers, a document where they waive their rights to their mechanics lien rights for whatever amount they've been paid. Let's start with Georgie.
I just have,
Yeah,
all right, now if I was reading this for a test,
yeah.
to me, it looks like from May 16th to September 20th, it's over, 4 days over the 4 months.
But it's from when the work is finished,
June
Okay.
10th.
right?
So
So now
not,
they
The
sign
the priority date will be May 16th.
it's not the contract date, it's the last.
Even to make this more complicated,
I get that.
if this loan were done on May 17th, the contractor would still have priority because the work was ordered on May 16th. So the May 16th date establishes the lien priority date, but the 4-month statute of limitations runs from the date on which the work was finished.
Okay.
In fact, I've seen a case where a contractor didn't file within their 4-month period, convinced the homeowner that they weren't finished with the job, went back in and did basically nothing, restarted their 4-month clock, and then filed the lien. Clever contractor.
If the homeowner purposely hides the fact that they owe this contractor money and gets away with it, is there any fallback on that, or is it suing?
What would happen, basically, assuming the normal or typical transaction, the title insurance company would pay off the buyer for their loss based upon having to pay the contractor, and the title insurance company, just like your car insurance company chasing, the other insurance company, would chase that seller. If you don't have title insurance, then your only remedy would be to go back and sue the seller of the house to get the money from them. And if they've skated, you can't find them, or that, like blood out of a turnip, they just don't have cash because they've now done something else with it, including maybe lost it, then you would really sort of probably be out of luck in terms of actually collecting it. So this is one of the things that title insurance does. You're paying somebody else to take that risk, which is why title insurance companies do all this search and look at all this stuff to make sure, hey, has this stuff been paid for, and how do we know that that's the case? A situation like this where this could come up with a sale, closest thing I've seen to this, not a major remodeling, but something comes up in the inspection. So the buyer does an inspection walkthrough and says, hey, the kitchen, the granite tops in the kitchen are all cracked. And the seller goes, hoped you wouldn't notice, fine, you know what, we'll replace them. They spend $5 grand, put new tops in, and then don't pay the people. And nobody asks for a receipt at closing. Right? That's where you could get into a situation like that, where the buyer has actually accidentally encumbered their own property by asking for work to be done. And in a case like that, the title company might not be willing to pay, even though it was still the seller's, fraudulent activity for not paying, and the buyer may be forced to go off and sue the seller in a case like that. So again, you want to know about and get those receipts or waivers.
Now, would the ending be different if this gal did not refinance?
Yeah, if
It would go to the mortgage company.
correct, if there was no loan on the 15th, and her previous loan was, was here before the 16th, then yeah, then the contractor is behind the mortgage lender. This only works for this specific kind of scenario. And it's confusing on purpose. It's meant to give you a situation that is atypical but can happen, and that you need to at least remotely be aware of.
So the original mortgage loses priority once it becomes refinanced.
Well, the original mortgage, the previous mortgage got paid off, right? So that date
Oh, okay.
is now immaterial, right? So when you refinance, then the new lien date is the date on which they record that lien. So if they do the refi on the 15th and they go record it on the 15th, it's the nature of the mechanics lien that would take its priority all the way back to May 16 because of that secret nature of it. This is the nature of construction. We don't always know whether we're going to get paid or not. Most, you look at most remodeling contractors and what do they require up front? Half, a third, at least something, right? So the world I'm used to working in, the commercial contracting world, that's not the case. You work and you don't get a down payment. So it can happen like this. It's something you need to be aware of. Like I say, with an inspection kind of thing, they could even do something like, the contractor comes out, does the work, you give them a credit card, and they accept it. It turns out to be a fraudulent credit card, and it's denied, later, and it could be for any reason where it could come up. Then you need to make sure that those mechanics lien rights have been waived in some manner. Any other questions at all about mechanics liens, really, which is what this was all about? Okay, so a few other liens that can exist. I think this is the last slide we have. Judgments we talked about a little bit earlier, but let me get specific about a couple of types here. So lis pendens is Latin for litigation pending, or lawsuit pending. Literally means that the property is now subject of a lawsuit. So you will see a lis pendens filed against a house that is going into foreclosure. Once the lender files suit to foreclose on its lien, a lis pendens is recorded against the property, which establishes the priority date as of the date of that recording. It basically says, beware, there's a possibility, not a guarantee, but there's litigation against this property, and there's a possibility that you will have to pay if your priority comes after, or if you buy the property after this date, or if you are refinancing after this date. In other words, it's a notice of warning, basically. An attachment is a little stronger. An attachment says, all right, look, not only is there litigation against the property, but there's a distinct possibility of a judgment. And so the court is now going to attach the property, and nothing can happen with it without court approval. So if you buy it or refinance it or do anything with it as a lender at that moment in time, you're completely on your own, because nothing can happen without court approval. Because it's, again, not a guarantee, but it's a specific possibility, as far as the judge is concerned, this property could be forfeited as part of this litigation. All right, so again, lis pendens is just a notice that a lawsuit is pending. An attachment means it's pretty serious, and it could be lost in a future judgment. All different sorts of lien types here. Looking at all these different sort of tax liens, IRS tax lien, estate tax liens, whatever. Which of the tax liens takes priority? The little county real estate tax lien, or the big bad federal government IRS going to come in and take everything you have for tax lien?
IRS.
I think the IRS is not one of the main ones.
The county tax lien, the king's position, the reason why I call it that, will typically take priority. What they describe in the text is that it's a prior existing lien. So even if your taxes are current at the moment, there is always considered to be a pre-existing lien there, so nothing can get ahead of it by date. So if the IRS comes in and says, this guy didn't pay his payroll taxes in his self-employed job for 3 years, he owes us $100,000, they are going to wait. They're going to get priority behind the property tax lien. They might get ahead of lenders, but even there, not necessarily. Then the last thing I just want to point out to you here, I don't even know if it's in the text anymore. This is not a subject you have to worry about for the state exam, but for those of you who might be interested in commercial property, because I mentioned earlier that real estate brokers have no mechanics lien rights, I want to be clear about the fact that on non-residential and non-agricultural property in Illinois, particularly for leasing commissions, brokers do have lien rights, but they're under the Commercial Broker Lien Act. commissions, as I'll show you later in the course, can be huge. And the current property owner can benefit significantly by refusing to pay what could be a 6 or 7 figure leasing commission. So that being the case, commercial brokers need to be protected and say, look, if you're going to still own the property and you're just going to refuse to pay us, fine, we're going to place a lien against the property. Now you can't refinance it, you can't do whatever. So in those cases, again, it's non-agricultural and non-residential property under the Commercial Broker Lien Act, in particular for leases. Lease commissions, it is possible for brokers to lien that kind of property. I hesitate to say commercial property because it's also industrial. It's anything non-residential and non-agricultural. Questions at all about anything in this chapter, Kate?
Here's the mechanic claims. Let's say you own a strip mall and you're gonna sell it to me, and you lease to Jimmy John's. And Jimmy John's redoes their bathrooms. You don't know about it, but Jimmy John's doesn't pay the plumber.
Yeah.
I come and buy it. I don't know the plumber hasn't been paid. What's the situation there?
That's a really good complex scenario for a law class. And I mean this seriously. That's a perfect kind of scenario for a lease drafting course for lawyers. Because you've got several situations, right? You have a lease contract agreement between the landlord and the tenant. And then you have the tenant going out and encumbering the landlord's property. So it may depend upon how the lease agreement reads between the parties. So my guess is that in a case where you're going to have a well-drafted lease between the landlord and the tenant, that is the problem with the tenant. And if that lease is guaranteed by Jimmy John's Corporate, which it probably will be, and that franchisee goes out of business, Jimmy John's Corporate is still going to be on the hook for that mechanics lien. But that's not necessarily the case. You'd really have to read all the documents and agreements.
Well, let's say it's not a gym, let's say it's.
No, it's okay. The scenario applies. So any owner of commercial or industrial property that does not control all of the construction type work on their property is running the risk of having mechanics lien filed against their asset without their knowledge, because they don't necessarily even know. So that's something that really should be covered in the lease. So that's a really good, serious, deep level kind of concern that any owners of any kind of investment property like that need to be aware of. There are two ways to go about doing that build out. The landlord can do it and bill the tenant for a portion of it. The tenant can do it and ask the landlord for a partial credit. So either way works, but there are pros and cons to either one. Some landlords, particularly in Chicago high-rises, will have a contractors list. You can use any one of the following 6, 7, 8 contractors because we know them, we trust them. And then you have a sense, you have communication, you have a sense that they won't do something inappropriate in your building structurally or from a lien standpoint. Other building owners say, no, we will not allow you. We do the build out. You want to put a dentist office in our building, that's fine. And it's going to cost $250,000 to build it out. We're going to do it, and you're going to pay us back, either in higher rent over the term, or you're going to reimburse us monthly or whatever. But we won't allow anybody but our contractor or our own forces to do the work. So mechanics lien rights are a very real issue on that kind of scenario. Yeah. Other questions? Okay. So we have chapter 11 for Thursday night, right? And I think I'll have a quiz for you to walk away with, also another one of these self-test quizzes. So we're going to cover contract law, kind of generalities of forming contracts, particularly as it relates to real estate, etc. Those slides are already up on the site, so it's there, and get yourself prepared. Thanks, Braden, for recording these things and putting them up. Again, if anybody has any other questions, feel free to come up and ask me. I'm happy to talk to you for a while. Or you can email me. Otherwise, I'll see you in two days. Try and stay warm.